This video is sponsored by CuriosityStream. Get access to my video streaming service Nebula when you sign up for CuriosityStream using the link in the description. So I've been thinking, which you may have noticed since there's a big thought balloon floating next to me. Whatever happened to thought balloons, or thought bubbles, or if you prefer the technical term, cumulus fumetti? Thanks, Mort. Now get back on the shelf and stay there. No, please don't put me back, I don't want to go back. While thought balloons still exist in the modern era, mostly in comic strips, mainstream superhero comics have almost entirely made the switch to first-person narrative caption boxes. DC's Ultra Comics #1 from 2015 even commented about exactly this, with the titular character starting off the series thinking in thought balloons before commenting that they made him look dated. He opts instead to switch mid-panel to the more modern caption boxes. We'll get back to this specific panel a little bit later because I think it's actually pretty clever and shows exactly why this switch from thought balloons to boxes has reshaped, didn't mean to write a pun there, modern comics for better or sometimes for worse. But there's a lot to this story. Thought balloons have been present in art since before the first comic books were ever printed. They are incredibly useful, but at the same time carry with them artistic restrictions and limitations. And ultimately, those limitations are precisely what has led to the slow, agonizing death of thought balloons in modern comics. Now, I realize that this topic is probably not something that most of you have thought about in a thought balloon, but I know a group of people who think about this stuff a lot.
Yeah, I was thinking about this when you mentioned it first, and I think maybe there has only been one instance, or maybe two instances, where a script is specifically called for a thought balloon, and I can't remember what instances they were.
This is my buddy Hass.
Yeah, I'm Hassan Otsmane-Elhaou, and I letter comic books like World of Krypton, Exo Man of War, definitely some other books.
Letterers, if you don't know, are the folks who put in all of the words onto the pages of comic books. As Nate Piekos explains in the Essential Guide to Comic Book Lettering,
letterers guide the reader's eye from one element to the next, so they're never confused or taken out of the story. Our goal is to create engaging graphic design that complements the style of the underlying artwork and the genre of the comic book. Well-crafted lettering harmoniously meshes with the art. It's there, but you're not focused on it. It elevates the comic book without drawing attention to itself.
And in this way, Hass is such a fantastic and thoughtful letterer. He's also an incredibly patient friend of mine who talked with me about thought bubbles for almost a full hour. First of all, as an insider, as someone with authority here, is there a specific term to use? Thought balloon versus thought bubble, word balloon, word bubble. What is the thing that we should be saying?
I think other letterers might listen to this and be in shock or horror or whatever, but I honestly don't think it really matters that much, to be honest. But balloon is like what I guess you would say is like the industry term, but it depends where you are. It doesn't really matter, because I think if you were to say, oh, that's speech bubble, every single person would understand that just as clearly as if you said speech balloon.
Yeah.
However, more people might get upset at you if you were to call them bubbles than balloons.
Interesting.
But I honestly don't think anyone should care that much.
That's fair.
I don't know if that really answers your question. I'm so sorry.
You keep saying that every time.
I got so carried away by the...
No, my favorite thing about you is I will ask you a question that I think is silly, and you will give me the most in-depth answer to that question and 3 other questions I didn't ask.
I feel like there's a problem with letterers. We're never asked anything about lettering. So the moment someone asks you one question, it's like, here's every thought I've ever had about lettering comics.
Okay, so clearly there's a lot to take in here. You know what, we're gonna come back to Hass a little bit later in the video, but first, to fully understand the function and limitations of thought balloons, I think we need a little crash course on the history of comics lettering. Sparta knows. What do you think, bud?
Yeah?
Big kitty. You ready to learn some stuff today? And we have our first dropout. How are you doing, you wonderful nerds? Scott here, and super quickly, I just want to thank everyone who sent in tips and donations to help me buy a new camera after the one that I had been using for like 5 or 6 years on this channel suddenly died on me. I'm back up and running with a new one, and it is entirely because of your support, so thank you so much. The stress of losing a core piece of equipment that enables me to, do my job made me break out a bit. I don't know if you can tell. I don't want to brag, but I have been dipping into my anti-anxiety medications a little bit more than normal lately. It's still been less than 6 months since I took this channel independent, and it's hard for me to ask for help sometimes when scenarios like this come up, so I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who did help, but more importantly, thank you to everyone who was kind and understanding. Even if you just sent good vibes, I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. But anyway, that's enough of that. On with the video. Okay, so just ignore my incredible artistic talent for a second, and behold this, a static image. That's fine, but what if I wanted these characters to be having a conversation? What would you change or add? Aha, trick question. The answer is nothing. These characters are already having a conversation. We just don't know what it is. We can try to infer what it is based on their expressions, but we can't really hear the details. So, okay, better question. What would you change or add to represent these characters having a specific conversation without the need for inference? How do you let the reader know precisely what words are being said? It seems obvious to us today, but that's thanks to the centuries of artists who have pioneered the artistic conventions of representing dialogue in static images. So, I don't know, just pretend you're one of them.
Good job.
Your first instinct might be to add the dialogue somewhere outside the image, maybe at the bottom. This is a perfectly fine approach. Certain comic books have been doing this for ages, and heck, even film took this same approach in the silent era. Have a character act out a sentence, and then throw the exact words on the screen a moment later, physically and temporally separated from the acting. But in still image form, like my extremely good comic here, this method falls apart when you have more than one character speaking. Who's saying what here? It's difficult to know without incorporating the text into the image further, spatially relating the dialogue to the characters. And you know what, maybe we'll just create some sort of container for the words to keep them legible against the background, and hey, what do you know? We've created rudimentary word balloons that tell our simple tale effectively. Wasn't that worth it? Artists have been using this approach for way longer than comic books have been around, from political cartoons in the 19th century to political cartoons in the 18th century and political cartoons in the 17th and 16th century. You get it. Political cartoons were always around, as I believe it was the only form of comedy that existed prior to the time a little balding boy tried to kick a football. And even before this, Renaissance paintings from the early 15th century included wispy little scrolls floating around people, indicating what they're saying. Japanese kibyoushi, Italian fumetti, cultures around the world got in on this trend independently of one another. Art history professor Adam L. Kern writes in his essay in the Comic Studies Reader,
"It is plausible that the bubble is a natural effect of the comic book medium itself. Once a medium of visual verbal narrative begins to depict more than a straight or linear progression of narrative time, some kind of narrative pictorial device like the bubble becomes useful. The bubble helps to render temporal complexity pictorially because it is essentially a form of mini-panelization, a smaller panel that can represent one moment in narrative time within a larger panel representing another moment. This might help explain why various cultures around the world seem to have invented something like the bubble device independently, as a function of the medium."
And you may have noticed that in some of these older works, a character's words didn't always originate from their mouths. Sometimes they came from their hands, or just their bodies in general, or they were just sort of hovering around their heads as an indicator. And that might seem strange at first blush, but it actually makes a lot of sense. Characters holding their words as scrolls makes them feel more possessive. These are their thoughts, and you know this because they're gripping onto them, physically attached to their ideas and beliefs. Alternatively, having balloons spill out of one's bodies makes sense to certain cultures and religions that put a heavier emphasis on spirituality. Sounds may come out of your mouth as audible words, but those thoughts, as these cultures believe, originate from your soul. So in a way, Speech balloons were the first thought balloons. Words come out of a character's mouth, but they sparked from a character's thoughts. Basically, words are thought fossils, which is a reference that you understand if you listen to my podcast, It's Probably Not Aliens, available wherever podcasts are. Please listen to it. It's good. It's fun. I like it. This obviously muddies the water a bit, though. The way these scrolls and balloons were used in these older pieces of art made it difficult to determine if a character's words were literally being said out loud or if it was just what they were thinking to themselves in their heart of hearts. And without a deep dive into the specific artists and art styles and influences and intentions, a lot of it will be up to your interpretation. Sparta's just loud today. I don't know what his deal is. As the language of lettering became more fleshed out and standardized over the centuries, there became a desire for a clear way to visually distinguish a character's inner thoughts versus their spoken words. Now, I've not been able to track down what was the first work of art to use cloud-shaped balloons to represent thoughts, but it almost feels intuitive, right? Its general shape resembles the classic speech balloon, but a little softer, less tangible. I think the key, though, is in the tail of the balloon. Yes, it's typically pointed more at a character's head in general than their mouth specifically, which I think definitely does help, but I think the bigger clue is how disconnected it feels. Made up of 2 to 3 little shapes that float upward toward the bigger cloud of thoughts. It feels like a visual representation of an idea coming to form in one's mind. And you can instantly see how this would be super useful to a writer, getting to know the innermost thoughts of one or more characters, their deepest desires, or, even just jokes. I asked my patrons on Discord to submit some fun thought bubble moments in comics for this video, and they did not disappoint. By far my favorite one is this moment from Justice League of America number 44, which was so funny that I thought it was fake at first.
Not only are you doomed, but so is everyone else you have ever touched.
Flash, Atom, and Green Lantern are all worried about their love interests, while Batman thinks to himself,
Robin, what have I done to you?
Mwah. Incredible. I personally think a lot about Nightcrawler here from the X-Men, right? Like the amount of times that he meets new people and they all have to hide how uncomfortable his appearance makes them feel is honestly way too high. Kurt is a good Catholic demon boy. Don't make fun of his looks, make fun of mine. That's right, you can't, 'cause I'm flawless. Don't zoom in, please? Please don't zoom in. And these glimpses inside characters' minds can prove to be the start of long-running plot lines. Like in X-Men number 3, when Scott Summers, the worst Scott, reveals that he has romantic feelings for his new teammate, Jean Grey. Or thought balloons can prove to be the start of short-lived, completely unnecessary plot lines, like 2 panels later, when Professor X also reveals that he's in love with Jean Grey. No thank you. No thank you. Yeah, I don't know. Thought balloons, for some reason, always make me think about the X-Men specifically because, I don't know, it feels like at any given moment they have at least 2 telepaths on their team, which calls into use these modified thought balloons with these little breath marks on the edges that allows the comics artists and letterers to project the thoughts of a telepath into a panel or entire scene even, where the character isn't physically present. Professor X can give commands to his mutants as they practice in the danger room or as they're miles away on a mission without him even having to be in the panel. And I know that sounds like such a small thing, but this detail is precisely why thought balloons started to phase out of modern comics. But first, the tea I'm drinking today was sent in by a fan. It is gunpowder green tea. It's delicious. They also sent me enough to fill this entire tin that I have for tea, but I was not using, so that's actually pretty convenient. So much tea. I'm good on green tea for a bit, I think. If you want to send me tea that I can drink in a video, please do so. I have a P.O. box, it's in the description, and when you send me stuff, let me know if it's okay for me to mention you by name. Also, I realize that I always drink out of these NerdSync mugs, which are no longer available. You can't buy these anymore, but maybe we'll do another run of mugs in the future if people want something new, something fresh. Who knows? Let me know in the comments if you want some. back to the video. So now that we've hit on the evolution and strengths of thought balloons, let's talk about how they suck, actually. Remember how I was saying that a telepathic thought balloon allows you to project the thoughts of a character into a panel even if they aren't physically present? Well, how could you do that in literally any other scenario or story with characters who aren't telepathic? To go back to my masterpiece for a second, if I wanted some off-screen character to project their inner monologue over this scene, how could I do that? I could just put a thought balloon here, sure, but a reader might think it belongs to one of the characters in the panel. And even if they do realize that the thought balloon isn't connected to one of the characters in this scene, how do we inform them whose thoughts these are exactly? How can we make it clearer? This question highlights what some might consider a limitation of the thought balloon: its tail. Remember how I was praising it earlier? It might actually be a bad thing. You always have to draw the character who's thinking that thought and then connect that tail to that character. However, some artists learned ways to overcome this. Let us now turn to the always artistically creative Jimmy Olsen comics for advice here. You know I gotta mention my Jimmies anytime I get a chance. So in this scene, a supervillain is tricking Superman into licking kryptonite-laced envelopes, which is just amazing. I would watch an entire Superman movie from the perspective of low-level criminals trying to pull stunts like this over on Supes, and it would be the most enjoyable 3 to 5 hours of my life, because that's how long movies are these days. But you can see that artist Kurt Swan's approach to overlaying the villain's thoughts into this scene with a solitary Superman was to superimpose a drawing of the villain spying on the Man of Steel, so the thought balloon could have a tail that connects to the thought haver. And you can adapt that idea even further by simply having a character's floating head next to the panel as they think their thoughts, so you know whose ideas you're reading. Like Jimmy here reminiscing about past adventures or fantasizing about killing people with swords.
I'm a huge fan of the little, like the heads in the, we don't do that enough in Western comics, I think. Like the balloon that comes in with just like someone's face. I can't remember what manga I was reading. It was like a baseball manga I've been reading recently where someone will say something and then there'll just be another balloon in the panel with just like a little reaction shot of another character who isn't in that panel. I'm like, that's so great. It's such a clever use of the economy of the page.
I agree. I think this method is very fun, maybe a little silly, and that's exactly what the problem was. Comics publishers in the 80s and 90s wanted to get away from this cartoony, silly vibe. You know, comics are serious, and you should take them seriously. They're not fluffy kid stuff, they're edgy. So, what better way to represent that change than by taking an element of the page that was literally soft and fluffy and chiseling it into something sharp and rigid? Enter the caption box.
And so I think there was a kind of a way of thinking like, well, how do we make it less kind of silly, like less comic booky, and how do we make them a little bit more serious? And to do that was to make it a bit more prosaic, which was just like, let's get rid of the kind of the thought outline and then put them in a box instead. Maybe it's now kind of serious, or like we'll make it more like a journal entry. And now it's a bit more, it's a little bit more serious because it's a bit more prosy.
If you've read a comic book anytime over the past 4 decades, you're more than familiar with first-person narrative caption boxes. Whether it's Spider-Man reflecting on his terrible luck, Batman surveying over Gotham City, or, the iconic Deadpool's inner voices arguing with each other. You've seen these things.
At their most basic level, captions are either information that is being thought but not spoken aloud by a character, or they are dialogue being spoken aloud by a character that we're intended to hear but not see.
Now, it's important to note that boxes with words in them predate first-person narrative caption boxes in comics by a lot. Comic books up to this point had almost always utilized some kind of omniscient narrator to describe what characters were doing and what was happening in the scene. And if those comics were written by Stan Lee, they may as well have been full novels the man wrote like he was practicing for the SATs.
If we want to use words like proselytize, misanthropic, we go ahead and we do it.
And when he couldn't insert himself as the narrator, he would insert himself as himself in editorial caption boxes. These are those little notes and panels that are like, make sure you read the latest Iron Man on sale next month, or if you forgot what happened in the last issue, read the last issue, and stuff like that. And occasionally letters would even write in setting information inside boxes, location names, dates, times, etc. So readers had been used to the idea of words inside boxes as a lettering tool. That sounds so silly to say, it's so obvious. I'm trying to set it up for context, I guess. But what made these new first-person caption boxes different was, exactly that, right? They aren't an unknown narrator or outside editor providing the text. They are the thoughts of a character in the story that you are reading, which at first blush, doesn't make them seem too different than thought balloons, right? Just a little redesign for the modern era. But I think the switch from thought balloons to internal monologue caption boxes also changed the function of a character's thoughts. Rather than providing an X-ray glimpse into a character's mind as if we ourselves have telepathy and are peering into their thoughts, caption boxes feel more personal and intimate with the reader. Like the character is almost acknowledging the reader and having a conversation with you without necessarily breaking the fourth wall. Scott McCloud talks about this in his book, nope, sorry, not that one, this one, yep, Making Comics, which I believe makes me the very first person to cite this book over the other one he's much more famous for writing.
Thought captions seem to acknowledge the audience in a way that balloons don't, as if the character was sending their thoughts directly to the reader and can give the text an extra level of intimacy. They also don't require the thinker to be in the panel to show where the thought originates from, so they can appear in panels that are framed from the thinker's point of view.
That last part is, again, one of the strengths of internal monologue caption boxes over thought balloons. And we've talked about how a limitation of thought balloons is that you always have to draw its tail and who it's attached to so the reader knows who is thinking. But caption boxes, they don't need that. You can place a narrative caption box over a scene a character isn't even in, and as long as you set it up prior to that moment, it's still perfectly clear whose thought it is. Hey, remember that panel from Ultra Comics I mentioned at the start of this video where the protagonist starts out thinking in thought balloons before transitioning to boxes because the balloons make him look dated? What follows that panel is the character's backstory, some panels in which he isn't physically present. Switching from balloons to boxes allows for the story to be told this way. And this comic is far from the only one to use thought balloons as an intentional reference to old school comics.
I did a book recently which had called The Miracles, which I can't remember if we used it for, but I think we may have used one thought balloon in there, but it was designed as a throwback to Golden Age comics. So it's done very intentionally.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's rare that it's part of the language of the comic book now.
Letterers today also sometimes design the caption boxes to represent the tone and color scheme of a character, making it even clearer who is thinking without really needing to directly connect the box back to the character who's having that thought, the way that thought balloons have to do. To use sort of a cliche example, because everyone will be familiar with it, notice the visual difference between Dr. Manhattan's inner monologue caption boxes versus Rorschach's. Even in panels that don't feature them physically in it, you know immediately which thought belongs to whom. In this way, caption boxes add an additional layer of artistic freedom to both the design of the boxes themselves and the ways that you're able to implement them. Rorschach's journal specifically is interesting because it helps contextualize the rambling, unhinged monologues of a huge dork by making them not really thoughts, but journal entries. This makes them feel a little bit more grounded, a little bit more serious, almost creating separation from the comic itself. I'm also reminded of Superman Birthright, where the second issue implements Clark's inner thoughts by way of an email that he's writing to his mom. Same kind of deal. However, in this attempt to make thoughts feel more grounded, these caption boxes have unintentionally created an enormous shortcoming. They reveal their biggest weakness, and it's why thought balloons may be disappearing, but they're not fully dead. I don't think they ever will be.
What you lose by not having them is the immediacy of it. With narration boxes, they don't feel as part of the scene in the same way that a balloon does of someone speaking. When you have a character here and there was a balloon there and it says, hey, that is happening in that instance, in the moment of time that is being depicted by that panel. If you have a caption box over the top, those things aren't necessarily happening at the same time. There is a separate level of separation, whereas if you have it in a thought balloon, it's still part of that scene. It's part of the immediacy of that moment.
That's interesting. I'd not thought about the sort of temporal difference between the thought balloons and the caption boxes, but I think you're totally right. Going back to those specific use cases that I already laid out, like with Rorschach's journal or Superman's email to his mom, it's clear that those are meant to make thoughts feel temporally disconnected from the current action, as if someone was telling you a story or detailing their thoughts after the events that we're seeing have already happened. But even without those conventions, the notebook and the email, regardless, caption boxes always feel disconnected from the scene.
There's kind of a distance. It feels a lot more like someone's telling you a story like after the fact, rather than like it's happening right now in the same instance that the drawing is happening.
Yeah.
So I think they work better for little quips where you want the immediacy of it, you want the punch and then the reaction of them thinking like, wow, that hurt, rather than the kind of removed, oh yeah, I remember that hurting when I am recalling this memory. There is like a defined nowness to dialogue that is replicated in the thought balloon that is not replicated, I think, in the caption, in the monologue caption.
So here's the thing. Time works really funny in comic books. To be honest, I've written an entire script about comic book pacing that I've never turned into a video, so I don't know, let me know on Twitter if you want me to actually turn it into something that you can watch. But one of the main things that determines how long any particular moment in a comic lasts is sound. Now, obviously, comic books can't generate, audible sound on their own. I've ruined a lot of record players trying. Everything in comics is visual, including sound. Sound effects can be small and quick, or loud and long. Anytime characters speak, the panel probably only lasts for as long as it takes to say whatever it is they're saying. You can even have a character sing, which lets you know exactly how long each panel is because you have the reference to the song's length in the real world. The point I'm trying to make here is that the introduction of any element of sound in a panel gives away approximately how much time passes during it. But, as Scott McCloud writes in the other book that he wrote, yeah, I know, I'm a cliche for mentioning it.
When the content of a silent panel offers no clues as to its duration, it can also produce a sense of timelessness. Because of its unresolved nature, such a panel may linger in the reader's mind, and its presence may be felt in the panels which follow it.
Because caption boxes don't feel like they're part of the scene, either on purpose or just as a byproduct of the device, panels that use them have a lingering, unclear sense of time. It may as well be a silent panel. But a thought balloon reads as part of the scene, a direct slice of the moment, and that affects the pace of the story.
You look at some stuff that happens in manga that doesn't happen in Western comics as much. And actually, manga uses tons and tons of thought balloons, but just they're styled ever so slightly differently. They're a bit more like the tons and tons of lines coming around like a soft white balloon space. So it's used tons in manga, Japanese comics, and that's a storytelling sensibility where you're trying to make things read very quickly, or at least there's a certain pace to it. Western comics have a completely different pace, which maybe is also part of why the thought balloon has disappeared, is that there's a lot more dense text in Western comics than there is in manga, for example. And so as part of that, you're losing that immediacy, which manga wants to keep by keeping you kind of constantly paced through the work. You can read like a 800-page volume of Monster or 20th Century Boys in the time it'll take you to read maybe like a 40-page, 60-page Western comic. These things are designed in completely different ways, and as part of that, like, they don't want you kind of slowing down or fixated on any one panel for too long, whereas Western comics, completely different.
And the more that I thought about it, I realized that thought balloons have a couple other huge benefits. Caption boxes are almost always first person, and while there are comics that do have, multiple characters narrating their own caption boxes all at the same time over each other, if you just want to show like a side character's quick inner thoughts, a thought balloon's gonna do ya a lot better there. There's a level of dedication that goes into using caption boxes. I don't really know of a comic that just uses internal monologue caption boxes like once or twice for the whole issue. That sounds like it would confuse the reader more than anything, right? Like, caption boxes really only work as running narration throughout the whole story. But with thought balloons, you can throw in like any character's internal reaction or thought anytime throughout the entire comic, and readers are gonna get it. So, all that to say, even though thought balloons are far less common today than they were in the past, there are absolutely uses for them even still today. A balloon and a caption box may be used to house the exact same thoughts, but they offer distinct functions as separate artistic tools. And to comics letterers, having as many tools at your disposal forged by those who came before you to tell visual stories effectively is invaluable. It's wasteful to throw thought balloons away entirely, even if you only get 1 or 2 uses out of them in your entire career. That's 1 or 2 moments that no other tool could have accomplished.
I think they're really cool. Like, I think they're a useful bit of the comic language that we probably don't take advantage of enough. I think once we get over the hump of like, comics have to be like adult, serious, then we can start thinking, well, like these things that we got rid of because they were silly, like, can we utilize them in more interesting ways? And I think the thought bubble, I feel like it'll come back.
Yeah.
It's too powerful a tool, I think, to be completely gone, but it's just we need to get rid of it feeling like a silly tool. We're replacing it with stuff that feels less silly, but it doesn't quite do the same job. And that, I think that for me means that when you're writing, you're not utilizing everything that is available to you within the medium. I think that means that you're naturally just kind of sacrificing an element of comics because it seems to be silly or is perceived as being silly, but comics themselves are ridiculous. So I don't think that should stop us, really.
Hass and I then ended the call the way that I end all of the calls with my friends, complimenting each other back and forth for like 5 full, uninterrupted minutes. Thank you so much for doing this. This was incredibly insightful, and you are just a treasure and a delight, and I love talking with you.
Honestly, it was fun. It was a lot of fun. Thank you. I appreciate getting the chance to wax lyrical about it. If I can plug you as well and say that you're also fantastic and your stuff is also incredible.
Seriously though, please go check out Hass's fantastic channel, Strip Panel Naked, which is linked in the description below, and it's also going to be pinned in the comments. And if you want to hear our entire unedited conversation about thought balloons and modern comic book lettering, I've uploaded the entire thing for you to watch right now over on my streaming service, Nebula, which is also partnering with CuriosityStream. So here's the thing. I'm planning on releasing a lot of Nebula exclusive videos this year, videos that wouldn't really work on this channel and that the mysterious and vengeful YouTube algorithm would likely punish me for. But I can throw them up on Nebula because Nebula is a place where creators like myself, Patrick Willems, Sarah Zed, Lady Emily, Nando V Movies, Laura Crone, and so many other creators are actually free to be creative. Encouraged even, wouldn't you say? I agree. Nebula is also a platform where creators can post their videos ad-free, sometimes extended cuts of their videos, and even just experiment with different formats and topics that wouldn't really work on YouTube. And we are thrilled to be partnering with CuriosityStream, the #1 place for thousands of documentaries and nonfiction titles on the internet. And we worked out a deal where if you sign up using my link below, not only do you get CuriosityStream, but you will also get Nebula for free as long as you're a CuriosityStream member. 2 educational streaming services? Why, that must cost a fortune. Nope. You're wrong. For you nerds, CuriosityStream is offering a 26% discount off of their annual plan. That is less than $15 a year for CuriosityStream and Nebula. It's simply the best deal in streaming for any curious learner. And it helps support educational and creative YouTubers like me, if you consider me to be one of those. If you're interested in learning more about cartooning, I highly recommend Seth's Dominion, a part animation, part live-action documentary about award-winning Canadian cartoonist Seth, whose art reflects the ways our own memories can affect and shape us. It's really good, and it's got me dying to dive into more of his work. So click or tap the link below today to get both CuriosityStream and Nebula for just $14.79 per year. That is 26% off. Once again, you can click the link in the description or go to curiositystream.com/NerdSync. Clicking on that link really does help out my channel. Time to end the video. If you're new here, this is sort of the thing that I do. I talk for like 30 to 40 minutes about incredibly niche, nerdy things. If that sounds really good to you, subscribe, hit that notification bell. I promise I don't post a lot. My fans can assure you of that. If you're feeling extra generous, please support me on Patreon. I would love to hit 1,000 patrons this year. Here's a lot of their names. I think they're all great people. They're great. That's patreon.com/NerdSync, link in the description. And hey, watch more of my videos if you have time. Once again, my name is Scott, reminding you to explore your favorite art through curiosity and vulnerability. See ya.